One, two, three.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that need looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. As the Tory leadership battle rumbles on, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will go head-to-head in front of Conservative voters in Manchester tonight at an event hosted by our very own Alastair Stewart. Can Rishi claw it back, having trailed Truss for weeks? And commuters' travel misery continues with bus and tube strikes in London today, and yet another national rail strike tomorrow. Plus, could the effects of lockdown be causing more deaths than COVID itself? Official figures reveal around 1,000 more people than usual are currently dying each week from conditions other than the virus. And let's end the week with a hard and fast run through some of the stories that have caught my eye in a bumper edition of my agenda. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you want to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GB News. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Alex, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date from the GB Newsroom. NHS leaders are warning the UK faces a humanitarian crisis this winter unless further action is taken to tackle rising energy bills. In a letter to the government, the NHS Confederation says people will have to choose between skipping meals to heat their homes or living in cold, damp conditions. It warns this could lead to an increase in annual deaths and create further pressure on the health service. The government has promised £400 of support for millions of households, but won't do anything further until the new Prime Minister is in office. Commuters in London are facing travel disruption again as public transport workers strike in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. The advice is to avoid the tube, which will have little or no services running. Most buses across West and South West London are also cancelled. Mainline services across the UK have been affected too due to yesterday's strike, and there's further action planned for tomorrow. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps claims union bosses are getting in the way of a deal.
I think the simple answer to this would be for the union bosses to actually put the deal that's on the table, which is an 8% pay rise over 2 years, no compulsory redundancies, for example, on Network Rail, and put that to their membership. And I think if they did that, the membership may well accept it. If that doesn't happen, plan B, if you like, is we're going to make sure that we actually get on with these very, very important modernisations, which are holding our railway back.
Meanwhile, Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, says it's the government that's hindering negotiations.
What I'd say to the RMT is the primary motivator for you going on strike today is your concerns about conditions the government may attach to a funding deal with a TfL. We're on the same side here. Nobody wants the government to be attaching unreasonable conditions to our deal. The only reason we need a deal is because of the pandemic. Let's work together with businesses, with other Londoners, to get the best possible deal for London. Today, it's ordinary Londoners, it's commuters, it's businesses who are caught in the crossfire. The government, Grant Shapps, isn't affected at all.
And some news just in. Cinema chain Cineworld is preparing to file for bankruptcy in the UK and United States. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. It's reportedly engaged with lawyers from Kirkland & Ellis, LLP, and consultants from Alex Partners to advise on the process. This is a developing story, and of course we'll bring you more as we get it here on GB News. In the UK, retail sales increased in July, but experts say a downward trend in consumer spending shows no sign of turning around. The Office for National Statistics says the 0.3% rise is higher than the expectations of a 0.2% drop, but sales fell by 1.2% in the 3 months prior. A 44-year-old man has appeared at Willesden Magistrates Court charged with the murder of 87-year-old Thomas O'Halloran. Lee Byer is accused of stabbing Mr O'Halloran to death while he was riding his mobility scooter in the town of Greenford on Tuesday. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Mr Byer is remanded in custody and will appear at the Old Bailey later this month. A man has been arrested following the abduction and sexual assault of a 6-year-old girl in Greater Manchester. The 23-year-old remains in custody for questioning. Police say the girl was attacked in the Droylsden area. She's now back with her family. And a man who killed his wife on their wedding night and put her body into a suitcase has been given a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Thomas Nutt killed his partner, Dawn Walker, and dumped the suitcase in bushes behind their home near Halifax in West Yorkshire last year. Miss Walker's body was found 4 days later. Extremely hot and dry conditions in Europe are causing wildfires to sweep across parts of the continent. In Spain, more than 400 firefighters and 36 aircraft are tackling a blaze in Valencia, which has ravaged 19,000 hectares. The fire has been burning for days. It was dampened by rain on Wednesday, but raged again overnight by strong winds. Over 1,000 people have been forced to evacuate their homes. And COVID-19 infections in the UK have fallen to their lowest level for 2 months. The ONS says 1.7 million people had the virus in the first week of August, a 34% drop from the last week of July. And the number of patients in hospital with COVID is also continuing to drop. But experts are warning figures could rise again in the autumn and winter. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to Alex.
Well, he's been all but written off. But we know how British politics tends to go. Condemn someone or something to the dustbin of history, and there's an uncanny likelihood it will all go the other way. So could Rishi Sunak really be the comeback kid? There are 4 more hustings to go before the end of this month, with the announcement of the new Prime Minister expected to be on the 5th of September. And according to the latest poll, Sunak is trailing Truss by 32 points. But as all savvy political campaigners know, you hold back your most brutal blow until the last phases of the bout to slug your opponent before they have time to stage an effective fight back. So could things get dirty in the great Tory showdown? Will the gloves come off as GB News hosts Tonight Round in the reality contest to become the next Prime Minister? Let's go live to Manchester and GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, give us an update on the latest goings-on in the leadership contest.
Well, Alex, I'm stood here in the very room where both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will be making their case to Conservative members here in the north-west of England later on today. Between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m, GB News will exclusively play host to the Manchester hustings, representing this region of the United Kingdom here as this contest really does hot up. I think it was incredibly incisive of you to mention there in your introduction the fact that the way that this contest has gone, as it has gone on further and further, potentially it has become scrappier and scrappier because the stakes are so high, because there are the apparent gaps in the polls now between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, over 30 points of gap. The question was, would Rishi Sunak sort of throw in the towel, or would he fight more scrappily? And I have to say, all the evidence points to more of a scrappy fight, potentially some pretty harsh blows coming tonight, and that may be what we should expect. The temperature being ramped up and potentially some pretty harsh words coming, particularly from the Sunak camp towards Liz Truss. He's accused her this week of being immoral over her plans to deal with the cost of living. Could we see harsher language still? And on Liz Truss's side, could she stumble at this crucial juncture? Of course, we're hearing little new policy from her team this week. Of course, in previous weeks, we'd had an absolute avalanche of policy. Liz Truss has got to maintain that lead, and she'll be trying to do nothing to disrupt it. Could today be the day that her lead turns around. There are still tens of thousands of Conservative members who have not voted. I've been speaking to some Conservative members who have not made up their minds yet. Might this evening be a time where minds are made? Well, it's all to play for still. Many people still to vote. Much scrappiness still to come potentially. All here live on GB News from 7 p.m.
Let's hope they've saved up the best stuff for us, Tom. Thanks so much for that update. Well, joining me now on the show is Alex Dean, who's a Conservative commentator. And also with me is Norman Baker, the former Lib Dem MP for Lewis and former government minister. Alex, going to come to you first as a Conservative commentator. Do either of them tickle your fancy, Sunak or Truss?
I support Liz Truss, but I agree with what Tom was saying in that piece about hostilities and tempers rising. I, for one, look at this race now and think to myself, what more are we learning that we didn't already know about these candidates? There's something quite destructive about blue on blue. In fact, Norman may feel the same way about what's happened in the Liberal Democrats over the years. You know, I recall the Nick Clegg contest being quite a feisty one when he was elected leader. You know, parties can really do damage to themselves. And it feels to me right now, with things like saying the other person is immoral, what the Conservative Party is doing is creating the billboard for the Labour Party at the next election.
And Norman, I mean, this whole competition seems to have hinged on the big issue of the day, of course, which is runaway inflation, the rising cost of living, and what the recipe is to make everything better again. And Rishi Sunak calling Liz Truss's plans immoral, saying that actually by cutting taxes, it rewards those more at the very top, and sort of shying away from potentially giving handouts is really going to see the bottom chunk of society suffer in ways that are unprecedented. Is he right?
Well, I think the analysis he's made about who will benefit from particular policy initiatives is broadly correct. That tax cuts will not help those who need the most help, nor will the cancellation of the national insurance rise help those at the bottom end. Whether you want to call them immoral or not is a subjective matter. What I do think is true, and Alex is this is right, is that what's happening now is wonderful material for the opposition parties coming to the next general election, because there are so many quotes now from not just these two who are left in the contest, but the others who were in the contest earlier, to make billboards, leaflets, or whatever you want to have. I mean, and people will have to accept they made those comments. They can't resile from them. I don't know why, in retrospect, and this is an objective view, if you like, from outside the Conservative Party, why on earth, having got down to two candidates towards the end of July, why they couldn't really have a quick vote, have the vote out of the way by early August, and give the new Prime Minister, whoever it is, time to get their feet under the table at what should be a reasonably quiet time in August, in preparation for a big splurge of stuff in September. Instead, we've got a government which is on autopilot, can't do anything, and there are a whole lot of issues building up behind the scenes. It's not sensible government, actually.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, Norman's got a point, hasn't he? And I often think that, you know, both candidates often try to emulate Margaret Thatcher, and I can't see her having much truck with trotting around the country on a vanity tour when there's a crisis. I mean, she used to see crisis as opportunity to really show the mettle of her worth. Do you think this is going on for way too long?
Well, I do, but it's not the fault of the candidates, of course. This is the rules that were set out, and the people responsible for running the contest have run it properly according to the rules. It's just that the rules that have been in place don't really reflect the modern era in which two battle-hardened, seasoned politicians, well known to us already. I mean, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer, for heaven's sake. Liz Truss is one of the longest-serving cabinet ministers in the modern era. These people are known to us already. I appreciate that the members may need a bit longer than the MPs to whittle down. The MPs needed to whittle down to two to decide, but not that much longer. I don't think we're learning that much more about these candidates through the course of this process. And Alex, my other view is that I don't think, contrary to what Tom was saying in his piece earlier, I don't think that many people are going in with unchanged minds or changing their minds from these hustings. I think most of the time people already knew, even if they haven't voted yet, I think most people already knew which way they were going to vote. And with about half of the Tory party membership voting by return of post, you know, you're playing for diminishing returns in this contest. More and more people have already cast their ballot. We've got ages still to go, if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, Norman, do you not think that, as Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss could pull the plug on this and say, I hold one of the great offices of state, I'm going to go get on an aeroplane and try and broker some better gas deals for us?
Well, I mean, she is still Foreign Secretary, so she could go and do some stuff as Foreign Secretary now, though, and no doubt that would send the wrong message to Tory party members who think she should be not leaving the stage free for Rishi Sunak. But, the idea that we have to have this elongated campaign just seems to me to be bit bizarre, quite frankly. We aren't done anything new, that's quite right. And also the fact is that a whole lot of Tory voters have voted. It's not, Tom doing his best to build a thing up for tonight, and tonight will be interesting for different reasons, no doubt. But the fact of the matter is that it's not like a general election. A general election, maybe 20% vote by post in advance, 80% on the day. So there's still a lot to play for up to the last minute. That's not the numerical position here. I don't know what the figure is, but I would guess at least half Tory members have already voted.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, do you think there's a risk as well that the constant talk, it is a huge crisis, no one's doing anything about it because of this distraction, but the constant talking about this argument over how best to deal with the economic crisis is actually crowding out other issues. And on one hand, you've got Liz Truss, who has the generation game-style conveyor belt of all the populism one could wish for if you can actually remember everything, and Rishi Sunak, who just talks about fixing the economy. Do we...
Well, I think they would say that's been a bit unfair on both of them, both because Liz Truss has economic policies, you may not like them, but Norman was just outlining some of them, the national insurance rise, cancellation, tax cuts and so forth. And Sunak has announced quite a few different policies. Indeed, at one point in his campaign, trying to regain momentum in bewildering speed, Sunak was announcing basically a new policy a day. So both of these candidates have fulfilled some of the things that you're suggesting they haven't, even if you don't like what was on offer. But my ultimate answer on this thing is that one of these two, and it looks very likely to be Liz Truss, doesn't it, is going to be our next Prime Minister. They could almost sort of start planning their administration now. Yes, okay, if you're told you have to go to these hustings, then you do them. But the focus has got to be on getting ready to hit number 10 with the B of the bang. Because to your point, there's very little a tail-end administration meaningfully and realistically can do, especially with Parliament not sitting. So whoever wins this contest better be ready to go, like right now, when they win.
I've got to go right now and speak to my other guests. So, Alex and Norman, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts on this ongoing spectacle. Well, joining me in the studio today throughout my show is former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. Ben, I'm exhausted by this leadership contest, and I just find myself getting more and more demoralised that one of these two people are going to be the next Prime Minister. Where do you stand on all of this? Are you sort of excited and enthusiastic about a change at the top?
Well, I'm excited about a change at the top. I was very critical of Boris Johnson. We discussed that we've got a sort of rudderless government at the moment, but I'd argue that we've had a rudderless government since 2019. Boris Johnson didn't use his stunning 80-seat majority really to give effect to his manifesto pledges. I know COVID interrupted stuff, but there was a lot he could and should have done as Prime Minister that he just didn't get over the line. And I'm actually quite pleased that you're exhausted by the debate and that people generally exhausted by the debate, because that means you've really heard the candidates lay out their policy agenda and they've nailed themselves to their particular masts. And it's going to be doubly easy, therefore, for us to hold the new Prime Minister, which, by the way, I think will be Liz Truss, hold the new Prime Minister firmly to account. And I agree with Norman that they should be using the month of August to get their new team ready, to get their policy agenda absolutely ready to be launched. And I think Liz Truss is doing that. She is already assuming she's won. And I don't think that's her being cocky. I read that 60% of Tory membership votes have already been cast. So if the polls are right, she only needs another 25% of the remaining voters to actually put her into number 10. So I think Liz is getting ready for number 10. I think she will be the next Prime Minister. I'm not going to debate you on who should be the next Prime Minister. I just think she will be the next Prime Minister. She's not a great speaker, so she can't hide behind all the bravado and bombast that her predecessor could. And she will have to deliver. And I think she's got 3 months in which to deliver. She's got to push buttons, and the electorate will need to see that she's pushing the buttons that she promised she would push.
Is one of those buttons going to be self-destruct? That's the question, and that's what the Sunak campaign team seem to think if she comes in with her tax-cutting agenda.
Well, I'm firmly behind her tax-cutting agenda. I mean, look at where high taxes have got us. us. You know, we've had a very high tax and borrow Conservative Party for the last 12 years. When the Conservative Party took over, national debt was at just under $1 trillion. It is now at $2.2 trillion. We are over 100% of GDP in terms of national debt. That's all under Conservative Party policy. And all the while, we've had high taxes. High taxes here are not the problem. The problem with Conservative Party governance of the economy is that it's a control government. It's basically been acting as a socialist government. They've borrowed, they've taxed, and they've spent. They created this inflation problem. They created this cost of living crisis. And Rishi Sunak was firmly in the seat when the seeds of this crisis were sown. So I don't think Rishi saying, I'm going to do more of the same, really cuts through, because more of the same is entrenching the problems we've already created. We need a change of direction. And Liz Truss, she's not talking about cutting personal income tax. She's not talking about the rich having their personal wealth enhanced by tax cuts. She's talking about cutting taxes that affect the price of goods, affect the price of fuel, and allow the cost of living crisis to some extent to be ameliorated. Rishi Sunak isn't prepared to do that. Well, he is now. He came under a bit of pressure and he had to relent on some of his things. So I think Liz is going to be in charge, and I think she's going to have this emergency budget. She's got a cabinet lined up, and I just hope she presses the button she's promised to press.
Oh, Ben, you've made me feel slightly more optimistic, albeit only an iota, but, you know, a little bit more. Thank you for that. Coming up on the show, with strikes bringing much of London's transports to a halt, it's more travel misery for commuters and yet another rail strike tomorrow. Are we paying too high a price? Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hi there. A bright day for many. Sunny spells expected, especially in the south, but there will be showers and a keen breeze, especially in the north. And that's because an area of low pressure is slow moving near Iceland, and tightly packed isobars to the south of that low is bringing, well, fairly breezy conditions to the northern half of the UK. Quite a number of showers. There were some showers earlier in the day across the rest of England and Wales. They're now moving and clearing the far southeast by shortly after 1 or 2 p.m. Once they clear, it'll be a bright afternoon for much of England and Wales, some sunshine, 1 or 2 showers for North Wales, Northwest England, but the bulk of the showers, along with a keen breeze, will be for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures not straying far from average, low 20s for many, 24, 25 Celsius in the southeast. Many showers disappear in the evening, with clear spells breaking out fairly widely for a time before the cloud thickens. Outbreaks of heavy and blustery rain come into the west of Scotland and Northern Ireland, a strengthening breeze. 11 to 12 Celsius for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Mid-teens more likely for parts of England and Wales, although in some sheltered spots a fresh start to Saturday. A bright start for the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. We keep these sunny spells here into the afternoon. Otherwise, a lot of cloud and heavy rain moving through Scotland and Northern Ireland, pushing into parts of northern England, turning more showery. And it's a breezy day for many. That wind gusty around the showers that will be coming through across northern parts of the UK, and 1 or 2 showers will pop up further south as well, but these will be few and far between. The heaviest downpours will be associated with a line of rain pushing into North Wales and northern England, as well as the North Midlands by evening. Scattered showers again on Sunday, with more prolonged rain coming through later. Another showery day on Monday.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Reaching the studios today was like stumbling across an oasis in a desert. The peace and tranquility of a low murmur of voices and empty desks in what is normally a hub of hullabaloo was welcome reprieve after battling the crowds on the streets. Snakes of people scuffling over one lone cab, queues at the bus stop like waiting hordes outside Harrods annual sale. Pavements chocker with confused tourists frantically pouring at phones as aggravated commuters burst through the throngs, huffing and puffing and swinging briefcases with self-important eye rolls. It's carnage out there. It's the second day of this month's strikes, with London under attack from transport chaos, set to continue tomorrow as it grips the entire country yet again. When, oh when, will life get back on track? Well, let's cross live to our reporter Ellie Costello, who's at London's Victoria Station for us. How busy is it looking there?
Well, good afternoon, Alex. You've painted a perfect picture there. It's absolute chaos behind me at Victoria. You might be able to make out that big throng of people. That van is actually now in the way, but I'd say there's at least 100 people waiting for a taxi at Victoria Station there. And I was speaking to a lady at the front of that queue earlier who said she'd been waiting for 50 minutes. She was a tourist. She had no idea that this strike action was taking place and was very frustrated when she got here. There is a triple strike action taking place in London today. We have the strike action on the Tube, on the Overground, and also a bus strike in South and West London. Those are two separate strikes over pay and conditions. And it does seem, Alex, that what I'm feeling here in Victoria is mostly tourists rather than commuters, although I have spoken to some commuters who've decided to walk to work today. They've got their trainers on. They're going to do their 40, 50-minute walks because they know they can't get a taxi, as is referenced by that queue behind us. There are also really long queues for buses as well, and this is because 10,000 tube workers are expected to have walked out today, alongside 400 overground workers. It's actually the fifth time that the RMT members on the London Underground have walked out so far this year. And speaking a little bit earlier this morning, the RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch, he claimed that the talks had come to a stalemate between the TfL offices and the government. In response, Sadiq Khan, he said he wants to resolve this dispute with the unions amicably, but he says that the government is using this as an opportunity to provoke the trade unions. Well, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, he's been speaking to GB News this morning. He says that the rail industry has made a very fair pay offer. So there's a lot of rhetoric going on, Alex, and I wanted to bring you the latest. This is the latest person to wade into this round. This is the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. He's called for wage rises in line with inflation. He adds it's the only way to protect people from sinking into poverty. So he clearly supports the trade unionists who are striking today. But there's also a separate bus strike taking place in London today, affecting 63 routes routes in South and West London. 1,600 bus drivers are striking in a row over pay. They say the pay rise that they've been offered is not in line with inflation, and therefore they are taking a real terms pay cut. So Alex, as you put so rightly at the beginning there, big disruption in London today, and the advice is to check before you travel and do leave plenty of time for your commute home tonight.
Ellie, thank you ever so much. Ellie Costello there outside London Victoria Station. Well, joining me now on the show is Paul Embry, who's a trade unionist and broadcaster. Paul, I'm assuming you probably have some sympathy with these striking workers, but do you think a compromise can actually be met, or is this going to bleed into an autumn of ongoing industrial action?
I hope a compromise can be met. And the truth is, Alex, I know as a trade unionist that disputes like this always have to end in a compromise one way or the other. But I would simply say, look, it takes two to tango. It seems that we often put the onus on compromise on trade unions and not enough responsibility on employers and the government. And I think as a trade unionist, I speak to colleagues in the trade union movement. I speak to workers every day. And there's a lot of anger. People are sick and tired of being told that they have to keep paying the price for economic crises that were not of their making. You know, we had the global financial crisis in 2008 and a decade of austerity that followed that. And pay rises during that period were pretty paltry. We've now got the cost of living crisis. And it seems to me that it's always workers who are being told, you have to show restraint, you have to tighten your belts. Well, what about some of the big corporations showing profit restraint in order to alleviate the cost of living crisis? So there is a lot of anger out there, and people don't strike unless it's a last resort. You know, I've been in an experience where I've stood on picket lines and I've lost money, and it's often an agonising decision for people to take, especially during a cost of living crisis when they know they're going to lose money. And when they do it, it's usually because they have a legitimate reason.
I mean, the argument from Grant Shapps is the government's offer, which I believe is an 8% pay rise, should be put to the members of the union at this point. I mean, it's not in line with inflation, which is now in double digits, but actually the national average pay has gone up by only 4%. So surely what's being offered now is relatively generous, considering a 1% rise would cost the government £1 billion a year. Do you think it's time that the big bosses of the union should say to their workers, or what do you think about this?
Well, I think, look, the RMT is a self-governing organisation, and it seems to me that it's for them to decide how they should consult with their membership. And I have to say, as a trade unionist who knows many people in the RMT, I don't sense that there's any disgruntlement among the RMT membership with their leadership. They seem to have tremendous support from their membership, the leaders of the RMT. So ultimately, look, it's for them to decide. But, you know, I simply say to people, going on strike is a difficult thing to do, even to get strike action in this country, where we have some of the most restrictive trade union laws in Europe. You have to jump through all sorts of hoops in order to get there. And the RMT have done that. And the RMT have done that because they've got what they feel to be a legitimate case. And when people talk about, well, you know, they're getting 8% or you know, potentially being offered 8% or whatever, let's remember that inflation is higher than that, as you touched on yourself, Alex. So what the unions are asking for are not inflation-busting pay increases, not even pay increases that meet inflation. What they're asking for is actually a real terms pay cut, but just something better than is on the table at the moment. And I have to say as well, I've been listening to your discussion, I think the danger of not paying people fairly and not giving people decent pay increases. We talk about the danger of inflation. What about the danger of a recession? We're facing a recession later on in the year. We're facing a recession arguably because there's going to be a lack of demand in the economy, and you don't improve that by making things more difficult for people and holding their wages down. You then get into that vicious cycle of bankruptcies and closing businesses and unemployment. That is something we need to avoid. We need to avoid it by increasing wages.
Paul, thank you ever so much. Paul Embry there. Well, coming up on the rest of the show, a man has appeared in court charged with the murder of 87-year-old Thomas O'Halloran. We'll have the latest. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Hello Hello there, good afternoon. It's 2:34. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. NHS leaders are warning the UK faces a humanitarian crisis this winter unless further action is taken to tackle rising energy bills. In a letter to the government, the NHS Confederation says surging costs mean people can't afford to heat their homes, potentially leading to an increase in annual deaths and creating further pressure on the health service. The government has already promised £400 of support for millions of households. Cineworld shares have plummeted after reports the cinema chain is preparing to file for bankruptcy within weeks. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the world's second biggest cinema business has hired lawyers from Kirkland & Ellis and AlixPartners to advise on the process. Well, within minutes, shares dived by 2/3. Cineworld has declined to comment. This is a developing story. We'll bring you more as we get it. A man who killed his wife on their wedding night and put her body in a suitcase has been given a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Thomas Nutt killed his partner, Dawn Walker, and dumped the suitcase in bushes behind their home near Halifax in West Yorkshire last year. Miss Walker's body was found 4 days later. And COVID-19 infections in the UK have fallen to their lowest level for 2 months. The ONS says 1.7 million people had the virus in the first week of August, a 34% drop from the last week of July. The number of patients in hospital with COVID is also continuing to drop. And from Monday, those with COVID-19 symptoms will no longer be advised to take a lateral flow test. You're watching GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. We'll get back to Alex in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.184 and €1.177 euros. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,484 and 21 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to We Need to Talk About. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News. A 44-year-old man has appeared in court charged with the murder of 87-year-old Thomas O'Halloran, who was stabbed on his mobility scooter in West London earlier this week. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is at Willesden Magistrates Court in North London for us now. Mark, what's the latest?
Well, making his first appearance in court was Lee Byer, a 44-year-old man who has now been charged with the murder of Thomas O'Halloran and also with another offence of possessing an offensive weapon, namely a knife. Now, this follows the death of Thomas O'Halloran on Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, in fact, in broad daylight. And Mr. O'Halloran, who was 87 years old and in a mobility scooter, was making his way down Western Avenue next to the busy A40 at the time when he was stabbed. He'd managed to still drive that mobility scooter on another 75 metres before he came across some members of the public who were able to offer some assistance. Now, despite the efforts of paramedics and the London Air Ambulance, Mr. O'Halloran was declared dead at the scene. In the days that followed, we had this very significant appeal by the Metropolitan Police with CCTV image released of a man running away from the scene of the attack. And within hours of that appeal, a name and address was supplied to the police, and that resulted in the arrest of Lee Byer at an address in Southall in the early hours of yesterday morning. Armed police officers from the Metropolitan Police Armed Unit SCO-19 involved in that particular operation. He was taken to a London police station and questioned before being charged last night. Now, he has been remanded back into custody and he's due to appear again at the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, next Tuesday, the 23rd of August.
Mark, thank you ever so much. Mark White, our Home and Security editor. Now, those who railed against lockdowns predicted exactly this: that excess deaths in the aftermath of unprecedented prevention measures, closing the country down and cutting people off from the vital services and lifelines that support human existence, would result in many, many delayed deaths. But did government policy actually kill more people than the virus itself? It is a damning accusation that should shake the world to its core. Official figures out today show that around 1,000 more people are dying every week than would be normal at this time of year. But at its peak, COVID was taking the same amount of lives every single day, even with stringent measures in place. Was closing normal frontline medical services a necessary move to stop even more fatalities, or a fatal mistake that should never be forgiven? And could the events of 2020 go down in history as one of the biggest global scandals? Well, joining me now on the show is Jamie Jenkins, who's an independent statistician and political commentator. Jamie, let's talk about these statistics, sort of eye-grabbing headlines today saying that lockdowns could well have killed more people than COVID itself. Is that a bold extrapolation, or do you think the figures would actually back that up?
Well, I think that statement itself, Alex, is actually false, because what they're focusing on there is actually current deaths at the moment, because we know that we had significant numbers of COVID deaths through the pandemic. But what we're seeing, and it's been probably for the last 2 or 3 months now, Alex, across the country, is that when you strip out people who are dying from COVID, then they're relatively low to what they were in the past. And then you look at the number of deaths in the country and compare them to the 2015 to 2019 average, we are seeing kind of deaths above average. There are around about 1,000 a week, and they're across a range of different age groups as well. And so I've been looking at the facts and figures. I used to lead the team at the ONS who produce the figures each week, and we're seeing kind of 10 to 14-year-olds. They're about 11.7% above average. People in their 30s are running somewhere between 11 and 12% above average. People in their 50s and 60s are over 10% above average as well. So we are seeing deaths that are not COVID, and there are other factors above average. And we can look at some of the causes in the deaths that we get each week as well. And some of the factors that we're seeing at the moment, Alex, is We've seen circulatory diseases, so those are things related to the heart, so heart disease, heart attacks, they're above average. We're also seeing diabetes deaths above average, and people who are having strokes are above average as well. And they could be a factor of not just the lockdowns themselves that we had in March 2020 and a few other restrictions throughout the pandemic as well. But remember, we were all told to stay at home, protect the NHS. A lot of people have avoided getting those kind of health checks or going normally forward to the NHS, and that could be contributing to some of this as well.
Those nightly press conferences that the government was saying it was following the science and basing their decisions on models that were made, essentially, that in the process of doing things like unlocking, of allowing hospitals to run as normal, it would create a far greater spike in deaths. Are we at a stage yet where we can really have a look with a critical eye at those decisions taken at a time of crisis and see them as having been perhaps overzealous or exactly the right thing to do?
Well, the modelling through the pandemic was quite shocking, actually, Alex. You look at where Boris Johnson last winter was asked to go beyond the measures that were in place, and they were predicting kind of these doomsday scenarios, and the actual deaths that we saw were around 90% lower than what the kind of the midpoint in terms of the modelling was when Boris chose not to go further. Look at more recent times as well. We've just had this latest Omicron wave, and there were again calls for people to put more restrictions, bring back masks, and all other things in the kind of the economy. But we didn't, and we've seen the cases rise. They've come down after about 4 weeks. So, we are learning as we've gone through. I think one of the things we've also got as well, Alex, is that at the moment, we're seeing record people rocking up at A&E. People can't get GP appointments, so they go to A&E. We've got about 13,000 patients in English hospitals who are ready to discharge, but there's not enough care in the community for them to go. And what that means then is somebody could be in A&E ready to be admitted to the wider hospital. They can't because the beds are being blocked. Ambulances turn up with new patients. They're then stuck outside, so the patients are stuck on the ambulance. Somebody then seriously ill phones for an ambulance. They can't get one. So the whole system at the moment is probably contributing to these excess deaths, not just the government policy of lockdown, but just the government policy around managing the NHS overall.
Jamie, thanks so much for coming on and shining a light over the statistics. Jamie Jenkins. Well, joining me now on the show is Anthony Hinton, who's a retired NHS surgeon. Anthony, thanks for coming on. I mean, do you think that delaying all of these routine surgeries, it's creating this huge logjam now that could well be contributing to problems we're seeing in the NHS and that rising rate in the number of deaths, was a major mistake, or did the government have no choice at the time?
No, I think the lockdowns were a major mistake, and a lot of doctors have been questioning this policy right from the beginning. And if we look back to before March 2020, the pandemic plans actually specifically said that the economy and the health services should not be locked down. This has never been done before. It was always known that it would cause large problems with health, with the economy, with education. Jamie's brought up some very important points. If we look, for instance, at the problems getting patients into hospital, absolutely directly relates to the problems with getting patients out of hospital into care homes and getting social care for them in their home. But we have to remember that over 100,000 care staff left when the government tried to force them to have vaccinations with their vaccine mandates. Now, I think the current excess deaths are a combination. They're a combination of lack of proper health care over the last 2 years, and indeed that's still going on. If you're unlucky enough to have a heart attack or a stroke, but the ambulance gets you to hospital within maybe 30 minutes, you're almost certainly going to survive, and you're probably going to survive absolutely with no disability. If your ambulance is delayed for maybe an hour or 2 hours, you've got a good chance that you may die. And if you survive, a much higher chance of ongoing disabilities. And the third issue with these excess deaths is that we know from the yellow card reporting system, the government themselves records that over 1,500 people died very shortly after vaccination. And that's probably underreported by about a factor of 10. So it's a combination of things.
Yeah, Anthony, thank you so much. You raised some really, really important points in that interview, and we haven't got time to build upon them all, but I do appreciate you coming on and bringing them all up. Anthony Hinton, who's a retired NHS surgeon, will join me throughout the show, is former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. I mean, both guests there basically saying, yeah, the statistics aren't painting a very good picture at all. And if this is the case, it really does raise some really serious questions about quite what government policy has done to people, essentially costing lives.
Yeah, well, I mean, the government has been challenged to produce its cost-benefit analysis, if you like, for, going for lockdowns, and it's steadfastly refused to do it. And they weren't following the science, were they? When you described government policy, you said that government said they were following the science, but they were doing it through modelling. And any half-decent scientist would tell you that modelling is not science. Modelling is, rubbish in, rubbish out. It may be a very fancy Excel model, but actually if your assumptions are a little bit out, the outcomes can be way off target. And what we do know is that total deaths in 2020 were not far off total deaths in 2019, and the same for 2021. And we're beginning to see excess death now. What we do also know is absolutely concretely is that we've got a cost of living crisis. And we heard earlier on the news that the NHS is talking about that turning into a humanitarian crisis. I think that's a bit of hyperbole, personally. But, the economy and health are not separated. They are integral to each other. And if the economy suffers, of course health is going to suffer. And we're only beginning to see the effects of 2 years of intermittent lockdowns. We're only beginning to see it. And this, I think the world is fundamentally unbalanced at the moment, politically, geopolitically and economically, because of lockdowns. And it's going to take a long time to bring the world back into some kind of balance.
Yeah, it's increasingly looking like it was a dreadful, dreadful mistake that's been committed around the entire world. Ben, thank you. Want to know your views on this. Do you think lockdowns were unnecessary? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Now, as it's the weekend coming, I thought I would treat you to a bumper agenda packed full of news nutrients and vitriolic vitamins to tide you over until Monday. So hold tight. There's a big, juicy rant coming. Well, future lifesavers with all A-star grades are being rejected from medical school because of a government-imposed cap on places. Meanwhile, the NHS has to beg for doctors from abroad, while an estimated quarter of all posts will be left vacant in the next decade. I just don't get it. Only 15.6% of applicants for medicine received offers this year, down from 20.4% last year when the cap was temporarily lifted, meaning around 7,500 trainees this year when we have a shortage of around 9,000 doctors. Do we really think someone from a country where English isn't their first language or whose universities wouldn't make it into our top 100 is preferable to a domestically trained workforce? The government won't do it because training is too expensive, but they spent nearly £1 billion giving people knock-off meals during the pandemic. I know what I'd rather get, and that's someone to fix my coronary, not someone to give me one. Oh, Rishi, if you're going to try to sound like you don't have millions in your bank account by listing the things you like to order from Mackie D's, you'd better make sure they're still on the menu. The breakfast wrap hasn't been sold for over 2 years, but I've spotted another sign of fishy Rishi. He's allegedly said before that, as a staunch Hindu, he's also a vegetarian. Funny then that he claimed to order a bacon roll with ketchup from the one fast food joint that specialises in cooking holy cow. Then he goes to a Hare Krishna temple with his wife to celebrate Lord Krishna's birthday. The thing is, all Hare Krishnas are vegetarian, with adherents not only sticking to a strict veggie diet, but actively promoting it. He may claim his tax plans add up, but his lifestyle claims do not. There's been a load of brouhaha over a burly hunk in Scotland being given a role as one of the country's new period officers. That's right, he'll be there to hand out tampons, sannies and advise teenage girls on menstruating. Well, he's hardly able to give first-hand advice on becoming a raging psychotic while trying to manage crippling back pain and searing stomach cramps every month, or be able to offer tips on how to administer products into intimate places. And for the average teenage girl, talking to Mr. Tampax 2022 would be utterly mortifying. Despite it being an either totally unhinged act of wokery or lunacy, there is an upside. For too long, the monthly bleed has been shrouded in taboo. By finally getting lads involved in the chat, perhaps we're one step closer to not being pariahs every 28 days. That's about it for now. Ben, any last thoughts on those topics?
I mean, I'm blown by the last subject, frankly. Men giving women advice on their... I mean, I'm hesitant even to, say it.
Ben, you know what? I'll save you from having to, because we've run out of time anyway. But it's nice to see a man blush over these things. That's all I've got time for. Join me again next week, 2 o'clock from Monday. Have a wonderful weekend. Coming up next, it's The Briefing. But first, let's have a little look at the weekend weather forecast. Bye-bye from me.
Hi there. A bright day for many. Sunny spells expected, especially in the south, but there will be showers and a keen breeze, especially in the north. And that's because an area of low pressure is slow moving near Iceland, and tightly packed isobars to the south of that low is bringing, well, fairly breezy conditions to the northern half of the UK. Quite a number of showers. There were some showers earlier in the day across the rest of England and Wales. They're now moving and clearing the far southeast by shortly after 1 or 2 p.m. Once they clear, it'll be a bright afternoon for much of England and Wales, some sunshine, 1 or 2 showers for North Wales, Northwest England, but the bulk of the showers, along with a keen breeze, will be for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures not straying far from average, low 20s for many, 24, 25 Celsius in the southeast. Many showers disappear in the evening, with clear spells breaking out fairly widely for a time before the cloud thickens. Outbreaks of heavy and blustery rain come into the west of Scotland and Northern Ireland, a strengthening breeze. 11 to 12 Celsius for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Mid-teens more likely for parts of England and Wales, although in some sheltered spots a fresh start to Saturday. A bright start for the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. We keep these sunny spells here into the afternoon. Otherwise, a lot of cloud and heavy rain moving through Scotland and Northern Ireland, pushing into parts of northern England, turning more showery. And it's a breezy day for many. That wind gusty around the showers that will be coming through across northern parts of the UK, and 1 or 2 showers will pop up further south as well, but these will be few and far between. The heaviest downpours will be associated with a line of rain pushing into North Wales and northern England, as well as the North Midlands by evening. Scattered showers again on Sunday, with more prolonged rain coming through later. Another showery day on Monday.
There's just 2 weeks left of voting in the battle to become Britain's next Prime Minister. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been dashing around the country, and tonight they make their pitches to Conservative voters in the heart of Labour-run Manchester. But do either of them have what it takes to defend and maintain Boris Johnson's mighty majority? GB News is proud to be hosting the Conservative hustings in Manchester, live and exclusive from 7 p.m. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. So tonight, live at 7 p.m, GB News will host the Manchester hustings, where Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will go head-to-head as the Conservative leadership race draws to a close. We will be in Manchester previewing this throughout the show. And I will be speaking with Conservative MP Chris Green, who is backing Liz Truss for leader, about what he makes of the contest so far. And it's been 1 year since Kabul fell to the Taliban. We'll be speaking to a former soldier who served in Afghanistan to ask what the situation is like there at the moment. And of course, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. But first, here's the news with Bethany.
Arlene, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date from the GB newsroom. NHS leaders are warning the UK faces a humanitarian crisis this winter unless further action is taken to tackle rising energy bills. In a letter to the government, the NHS Confederation says people will have to choose between skipping meals to heat their homes or living in cold, damp conditions. It warns this could lead to an increase in annual deaths and create further pressure on the health service. The government has promised £400 of support for millions of households, but won't do anything further until the new Prime Minister is in office. Commuters in London are facing travel disruption again today as public transport workers strike in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. The advice is to avoid the tube, which will have little or no services running. Most buses across West and South West London are also cancelled. Mainline services across the UK have been affected too due to yesterday's strike, and there's further action planned for tomorrow. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps claims union bosses are getting in the way of a deal.
I think the simple answer to this would be for the union bosses to actually put the deal that's on the table, which is an 8% pay rise over 2 years, no compulsory redundancies, for example, on Network Rail, and put that to their membership. And I think if they did that, the membership may well accept it. If that doesn't happen, plan B, if you like, is we're going to make sure that we actually get on with these very, very important modernisations, which are holding our railway back.
Well, Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, says it's the government that's hindering negotiations.
What I'd say to the RMT is the primary motivator for you going on strike today is your concerns about conditions the government may attach to a funding deal with a TfL. We're on the same side here. Nobody wants the government to be attaching unreasonable conditions to our deal. The only reason we need a deal is because of the pandemic. Let's work together with businesses, with other Londoners, to get the best possible deal for London. Today, it's ordinary Londoners, it's commuters, it's businesses who are caught in the crossfire. The government, Grant Shapps, isn't affected at all.
Cineworld shares have plummeted after reports the cinema chain is preparing to file for bankruptcy within weeks. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the world's second biggest cinema business has hired lawyers from Kirkland & Ellis and Alex Partners to advise on the process. Cineworld has declined to comment. A 44-year-old man has appeared at Willesden Magistrates Court charged with the murder of 87-year-old Thomas O'Halloran. Lee Byer is accused of stabbing Mr O'Halloran to death while he was riding his mobility scooter in the town of Greenford on Tuesday. The elderly man was pronounced dead at the scene. Mr Byer was remanded in custody and will appear at the Old Bailey later this month. A man has been arrested following the abduction and sexual assault of a 6-year-old girl in Greater Manchester. The 23-year-old remains in custody for questioning. Police say the girl was attacked in the Droylsden area on Wednesday. She's now back with her family. And a man who killed his wife on their wedding night and put her body into a suitcase has been given a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Thomas Nutt killed his partner, Dawn Walker, and dumped the suitcase in bushes behind their home near Halifax in West Yorkshire last year. Miss Walker's body was found 4 days later. Extremely hot and dry conditions in Europe are causing wildfires to sweep across parts of the continent. In Spain, more than 400 firefighters and 36 aircraft are tackling a blaze in Valencia, which has ravaged 19,000 hectares. The fire has been burning for days. It was dampened by rain on Wednesday, but raged again overnight by strong winds. Over 1,000 people have been forced to evacuate their homes. And COVID-19 infections in the UK have fallen to their lowest level for 2 months. The ONS says 1.7 million people had the virus in the first week of August, a 34% drop from the last week of July. The number of patients in hospital with COVID is also continuing to drop, but experts warn figures could rise again in the autumn and winter. And from Monday, those with COVID-19 symptoms will no longer be advised to take a lateral flow test. You're watching GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to the briefing with Arlene.
Welcome to the programme. It's just coming up to 6 minutes past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, the race for number 10 still drags on, and tonight GB News will be hosting an exclusive Conservative Party hustings in Manchester. Liz Truss leads Rishi Sunak in almost every poll, but will tonight change anyone's mind? Well, let's cross over to Manchester and get the latest from GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom.
Yes, Arlene, preparations are well underway here in central Manchester. We've seen the seats being laid down, the screens being hoisted up, and indeed lots of preparation work, multiple cameras and microphones being tested. This is going to be a pretty seismic event at a fairly crucial point in this leadership race. Just a couple of weeks to go until the end of this contest, so every vote really counts now. We know that there are tens of thousands of Conservative members who have yet to vote. Could this be the crucial event that swings their vote, that changes or indeed forms their opinions? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by the maestro, the man who will be hosting this evening's event. Alistair Stewart is here with me. And Alistair, what are you expecting from the leadership contenders this evening?
Well, I think it really speaks volumes to what you've just said, and that is that people out there, particularly Conservative Party members, and they're the only people, whether you like that or not, that matter at this juncture, have heard so much about how you help folk through the energy crisis, what your view is on getting Brexit done and clearing the statute book and this, that and the other. And there are a few areas left where you can still put a postage stamp between them, and those are the areas that I think we'll be focusing on. But for me, and you and I talked about this yesterday at some length, I really want to know what they both think being a Conservative in the 21st century means post-Boris Johnson. We've all lived through moments like that, whether it was, are you a Heathite or a Thatcherite, whether you're a Cameroonian or whether you're not a Cameroonian. We're now at one of those tipping point moments. Johnson's gone. A lot of people in this room will be not happy about that. We know that from all of the data. So how are they going to build bridges between the party in Parliament and the party in the country? So on that basis, I think the big picture will be the stuff that yields the really fascinating, defining answers.
Really interesting. Such a moment in this country's history, a real juncture, potentially the most ideological Prime Minister, whoever of these two wins the leadership, potentially the most ideological Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher of any party.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the ideology is always the case, is defined by the economics of it. And you've got the coincidence of terrifying borrowing numbers. You've got the coincidence of the economic impact of the coronavirus, and front page of the Telegraph is well worth reading. Anyone who's not